Welcome to the Plato Paradigm, a paradigm shift in reading Plato's dialogues. Episode 139, Meno 95e to 96a. Last time, Socrates quoted from an old respected poet to show that even one person could disagree with himself about virtue being something that can be taught. He quoted Theognis as saying that if you keep the company of good people, meaning the rich, you could teach yourself good things. Theognis had probably said that you could learn from good people good things, but Plato probably has Socrates deliberately misquoting and changing the verb from learn to teach yourself, thus making the quote appear to be pertinent to the discussion about the teachability of virtue. Now Socrates has to show where Theognis contradicts this notion. En allois dege oligon metabas, in other lines, moving along a little bit, Socrates intends to say that this is in the same poem, which our manuscripts of Theognis corroborate, but it's not really a little further on, it's 300 lines later. Eiden poieton fesi, kai entheton andrino eima, legepos oti pollus anmistus, kai megalus epheron, hoidun aminoi tuto poien kai upotan ex agathou, patros agento kakos, Peithomenos muthoisis ofros in alla didaskon, upotipoie ses ton kakon andragathon. En noes oti autos hauto palin periton auton tanantia lege. Finetai. I haven't translated the Greek yet, but I hope you can hear how Socrates has destroyed the poem. He has inserted prose into the poetry of Theognis. At the same time, he has a very good memory, and it's possible that he has moved some lines around. This is debatable because we cannot be sure that the manuscripts of Theognis are reliable when it comes to the order of lines. I can't keep the mess Socrates makes in an English translation, but I'll do my best. If intelligence were something to be made, he says, and something to be put in a man, he says somehow that they would pay many and great wages, those able to do this, and a bad man would never become of a good father, the son being persuaded by sound pieces of advice, but teaching you will never make the bad man good. Do you notice that he contradicts himself about the same things? So he appears. Meno, as usual, is clueless. He hasn't thought this through, but he probably has heard the verb teach twice. Last time Theognis had said that you, the listener, associating with good people, esthloi, the good and well-born, would be able to teach yourself esthla, good things. While this time, Theognis claims that even if you teach, you will never make a bad man good. And he uses here agathos, not esthlos. For Meno, then, it would sound as though Theognis is claiming in the first passage, which we heard last time, that virtue is teachable. You can teach yourself good things from associating with good people, while now Theognis appears to be saying that you cannot teach virtue, or virtue itself is not teachable, because even if you teach, you cannot make a bad man good. Even if we assume that Socrates is quoting correctly, and he didn't replace the word learn with the word teach in the first quotation last time, even if that is the case, Theognis isn't actually contradicting himself. For Theognis, at least in this poem, the good people are the rich and the bad people are the ordinary people, the commoners. Theognis assumes that his audience has some sense, and he's saying that if you do have any sense, you will want to learn good things from the good. If you associate with the bad, in other words, the poor, the ordinary people, you not only won't learn anything good, in other words, you won't learn the good manners and customs of the rich, but you will also lose the little sense that you actually have. No one with any sense would want to be poor. And we'll ignore Socrates for now because Socrates hadn't been born at the time Theognis was making his poems. In this later part of the poem, Theognis is concentrating on sense or intelligence. Earlier he had used the word noos, which became nous, and here he's using the word noema, but he's basically talking about the same thing. And he's saying that intelligence is so valuable that if it had been possible to put intelligence into people, then people would have been willing to pay a lot of money to have it done. But they can't. Intelligence, apparently, according to Theognis, is innate. You're born with it. And then Theognis makes it very clear who he thinks has intelligence and who he thinks doesn't have intelligence. A good father will never have a bad son, but a bad person can never be taught to be good. Theognis has probably done some background research and discovered that rich parents have rich children, while poor people tend to have poor people, and teaching them to be rich doesn't make them rich, they remain poor. And as we saw last time, if you want to be rich, then you're intelligent. If you want to be poor, you lose what intelligence you already have. Therefore, according to Theognis, according to Plato's Socrates, virtue is teachable when both sides have intelligence, both the rich, well-born person and the person aspiring to learn good, noble customs and habits, and possibly even ways to become rich. An ordinary person is obviously senseless because he is ordinary and isn't rich and well-born. That sort of person cannot become good even if taught, which means that for poor people or ordinary people, virtue is not something teachable. In other words, virtue is teachable in context. It depends on the person being taught. We might even say that the teacher of virtue needs to have sense. If the person teaching is well-born and good himself, then he has sense and he can teach aspiring people to be good as well. While if someone tries to teach a poor commoner virtue, he himself must be senseless. He's wasting his time. The historical Theognis seems to have thought a bit like this in any case, even if Socrates here hasn't been doctoring the poem. But does that mean that Plato as well thinks like Theognis? Is this what we're supposed to learn from the dialogue? It might well be the case that Plato thinks that teachers and students need to have intelligence in order to impart knowledge or understanding, but this doesn't mean that Plato thinks that poor people lack intelligence while rich people have intelligence. The dialogues tend to show the opposite in some cases. It appears that status is unimportant for Plato. Socrates is poor but intelligent. Many of the aristocrats and rich sophists in the dialogues are not so intelligent, although many of the sophists are intelligent. So removing the social status, we are left with virtue being something teachable if intelligence is present. More accurately, the presence of intelligence is a necessary condition. It doesn't guarantee that virtue is something teachable. We haven't actually considered that, apart from the central discussion in the dialogue in which phronesis was mentioned. Why then is Theognis here? I think it is to do with Anytus, who appeared just a few lines before and left, just before this conversation about the inability of ordinary people to decide whether there are teachers of virtue or not. So far as that conversation goes, Theognis is redundant. Socrates and Meno have already come to the conclusion that the sophists may or may not be teachers of virtue, it's unclear, or that the fine and good, in other words, the rich, genteel citizens of a polis, may or may not be teachers of virtue. We don't need to have Theognis also showing us that even an individual could be confused about whether virtue is teachable or not. However, there are a few verbal similarities between Theognis and Anytus. They both refer to advice, giving sound advice. In both cases, the person seeking advice will learn if persuaded. That is particularly the case with the son who is persuaded by his father. Theognis does suggest another possibility. Whether the aspiring student learns or teaches himself, in either case, it is not the well-born good citizen who does the work of teaching, but the student himself, simply by being associated with the good citizen. If I'm correct, then Plato had Theognis in mind, that type of good role model, and he based Anytus on that. The good man in Theognis is brought to life in Anytus.